Okay, so I am recording now. We're a few minutes early though, so thanks to everybody. If the panelists want to turn off your videos, that's fine for now while we're waiting. And yes, thanks for everybody for joining us and for being so punctual. While we're waiting, maybe you could just tell us in the chat function at the bottom of your screen where you're joining us from today, so we have an idea geographically. Who's going to be the first? LA, great. Toronto.
Is that better?
Yeah, we're actually live broadcasting, so I turned off your video as we're just welcoming everybody in. We got some early punctual people, which is fantastic. Pennsylvania, London, Ontario. Welcome. If you're just joining us, please feel free to let us know in the chat function where you're joining from. And we'll get started in about 5 minutes. Thank you, Michael, for attending the first session. It was very interesting, as I'm sure this one is going to be as well. So welcome back. For those of you who are just joining, please let us know where you're joining from in the chat function. I'm here in Toronto, and our panelists are all joining us from Vancouver area. Hi, Andy. New York. Great. So we have a few more minutes before we get started. If you're just joining us, please let us know in the chat function where you're joining from. Vancouver, Germany. Chilly, Regina, yes. It's actually quite chilly and, well, it's wet in Toronto. Connecticut, India. It's great. Alberta. Oh, we've already got some questions here. Oh, so yeah, please, if you've joined us, use the chat function and only use the Q&A function later on in the session to pose your questions to the speakers today. Hi, Laura. Okay, we'll just give it another couple minutes. Welcome to those of you who are just joining in. You can take a second to just let us know in the chat function where you're joining from. That would be great. Boston. Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa. Welcome. Still people filing in here, so give it another minute. welcome. If you're just joining us, just please take a minute in the chat function and let us know where you're joining us from. London, England. Okay. Okay, so just to be mindful of everybody's time, even though I do see people are still making their way in, I do want to just get things going. So welcome back to our second session of the day in this month's free webinar series that's focused on material innovation and sustainability. I'm Kelly Drennan, the founder of Fashion Takes Action, a nonprofit based in Toronto, Canada, that is devoted to advancing sustainability in the fashion industry since 2007. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, we did start off this morning with a panel on decarbonization of the fashion industry from a raw materials perspective, and we learned a ton of information. It was recorded, so not to worry if you weren't able to join us. We will be sharing the recordings as well as the recording from today's and our final session, which follows this one. So for today's webinar, we will have time after the presentations for you to ask questions, but please, we ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and just use the chat function for comments. And then we also have an upvote feature on the questions. So if you do see a question in there that you wanted to ask, just simply like it and it will bump it up to the top of the queue. As I mentioned, we've learned a lot from this morning's session, and I'm sure we're going to learn from this session as well. Did you know that 80% of a product's environmental footprint is decided at the design stage? The fabric that fashion brands source plays a massive role in a company's commitment to sustainability. This presentation, sponsored by Kendor Textiles, will demonstrate the environmental benefits of sustainable fabrics and what we can learn from industry trends. First up, we have Paul King, the president of Kendor Textiles, who will then be followed by Kemp Edwards from Ethical Profiling Limited. And following the presentations, we'll open it up to all of you for your questions, and that section will be moderated by Chris Herrera from Kendor Textiles as well. And now over to you, Paul. You'll kick things off, I hear, with a land acknowledgement from Vancouver, where you are all based.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I'd like to thank and acknowledge that we're doing this from the traditional.
Sorry, could you just turn on your video now? I'm going to turn mine off. Okay.
Okay.
Turn on your video. Perfect.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you also for putting this all together, and we'd like to acknowledge that we are doing this from the traditional territory of the Tsawwassen and Musqueam First Nations, and all the Hulakan peoples who speak this language. We welcome them for allowing us on this land. Moving on to our topics today. Let me just see if I can get my share screen going. So driving change through sustainable sourcing. Kendor has been lucky enough to have been involved in this for quite a few years, and our topic outline is as follows today is sustainable sourcing challenges, how we're driving change, designer contribution to sustainable sourcing, and proven success through sustainable sourcing. So each of these is challenging in its own way. The biggest challenges that we see are identifying the fibers first, as standards are always evolving. Over the years, we've had many, sorry, my bad here. I just got to get my self set up proper here.
Could you make it full screen for us, Paul?
Yeah, sorry,
okay.
I'm just working on that. Not allowing me in there. Oops, daisy. There we go. Okay, I think that's working now. So the first step is identifying fibers that meet these standards, and there's a variety of people that we go to for this help. Typically, this would be through research like Textile Exchange, Eco Textile News, Canopy. This changes always as we move on. We have found that in the beginning, many people thought bamboo and soy were sustainable. Of course, they were not, as we've later found out. So this is very important to always be doing research on these subjects. And the next, probably the most difficult aspect, is negotiating minimums and pricing. Kendor has been sourcing in this area for over 28 years, and when we began, minimums were astronomical, sometimes in the 20 to 30,000 meter range. Now we've been able to negotiate through long-term relationships as little as 300 meters of an item with some of our mills, due to the fact that we're coming back with regular business all the time. This is something that's going to change as time goes on and as more things are available. Obviously, confirming market tolerance for pricing is also a challenge. This can be enhanced by perhaps capsule collections or putting one's toe in the water, as it says, to find out if you can really afford to offer these items. Direct to consumer is allowed a little bit more margin in this area, and that certainly seems to be growing as we move through this pandemic. More and more of our companies are moving away from bricks and mortar and more towards selling directly to their customers. And obviously, building a story that fits long-term with your company's ethos and mission and goals is very important. This can be either through the fiber, in the case of companies like Ten Tree, who have pioneered with Refibra, or organic cottons. These kind of things can be part of your story. And getting to market is also very, very important. Sometimes it can take a very long time to try to build your story, and maybe the most important thing is just getting to market so that you can find where your story will lead you. How Kendor is driving change and how the industry is driving change. So sustainable sourcing is a process that relies on commitment, creativity, and innovation. Some of the ways that we can do this is by offering just-in-time inventory, minimizing waste in the manufacturing process. So by this we mean, instead of having to source independently, doing minimums per color offshore, utilizing folks like Kendor or others in this industry who can offer you just-in-time inventory. You sell what you need and you buy what you need. Responsible fiber partnerships, and this begins from fiber to fabric, and basically finding people that are willing to work with you, willing to back you up. This can be local manufacturers who you work with. This can be finding partnerships with your fabric waste. There's some great people in the Vancouver Lower Mainland, Fab Cycle, that some of our companies will work with, who will take all of our fabric waste, regardless cutting waste, offcuts, that kind of thing. Recycling all of your bags and tubes. Kendor has a network of companies that we collect cutting tubes from. And all these things are part of the whole industry. And then pushing for transparency. And I've been in this business about 37 years, which makes me an oldster. But when I began, nobody would share any of their sourcing information. It was considered very proprietary. Now I think you'll find that in the sustainable fabric and the sustainable garment area, people are very great at this. We have customers who do collaborations together. And I think transparency right down to the root of where the fabric comes from and the dyeing procedures, this is all very important. Exploring circular opportunities. We've had some of these opportunities come our way of late. There's companies that are looking at upcycling textile waste, garment waste in Los Angeles and Mexico and North Carolina. These are things that everybody should be looking into. And I see this as the future of textiles. I think both before and after our talk, there's been information about this, and it's going to be continuing to grow. And one of the other great elements of change is supporting the North American economy. Through the pandemic, Kendor has been busier than it's ever been, and so have the factories in our Lower Mainland and in Ontario, from what I understand too. Folks are busy from the trim manufacturers to the designers, the retailers, the design offices. All these things are very important. Sharing the environmental benefits of sustainable fabric sourcing is another option. We have found that this is basically good from the fiber on up. There's less. We're trying to work with Okie-Tex certified facilities that will basically have less pollution during the manufacturing of the product, and offering extensive sustainable fabric options. So this could be having a variety of different things, like programs, I guess would be the best way to put it, so that it's not just one item that's out there. Our particular company, over 70% of our product sales is from sustainable fabrics at present, and we aim to improve this annually, hopefully by 25% a year is our goal. Many of the fabrics that we're working with are in the man-made cellulosic area. This can be Modal, Tencel, Ecovero. We're finding the hand on these fabrics is spectacular. The story behind Lenzing's Tencel is being closed loop has been very greatly appreciated by many of our customers, and the hand is just wonderful. And then plant-based materials. This can be linen, organic cotton. We're looking at some K-pop materials right now. And then future material circularity. This is again going back to upcycled materials, both garment and fabric waste. So now we're just going to show you a little video of a factory tour. So this factory that we work with in Jiangsu province is a fantastically clean organization running with German equipment. There's a variety of different equipment here. Oh, there's my looming face. Sorry, we seem to have lost video, but I can commentate as we go. This particular factory, if you notice, there's absolutely no lighting in the factory. It's all natural light coming in. So very nice working environment. They use small die kettles from 1 roll to large die kettles that can do 3,000 meters. They run a massive power grid that is basically capturing steam, harnessing solar power throughout the plant. See solar panels all over the parking lots. It's just a fantastic place. The company's called Limfa, and great working environment, lots of natural light. Here they are just prepping and tentering some of the fabrics here. This is in the printing facility. Gives you an idea of some of the sourcing that we've been doing and some of the companies that are out there. This is the inspection procedures here. Roll cutting in preparation for shipping. So it gives you an idea of some of the places that are out there. If you have any questions on this, you can always reach out to us. So the next step in our outline was designers' commitment to sustainable sourcing and the design shift that we need to see. Really, ideation is where a lot of this starts at the design stage. What Kelly was pointing out earlier, that 80% of environmental footprint is decided at the design stage. The way you source fabric reflects what you value most. Now, I'm sure a lot of designers would love to be sourcing strictly sustainable fabrics, but as we know, this is can be met with resistance at different areas of your company. And that's why we recommend perhaps a small capsule collection to start. This is a way that you can get yourself going. Design mentality is considering sustainable sourcing from the beginning, creating that sourcing budget and committing to the price of sustainability. And of course, consumer education, working towards educating consumers on the price of sustainability and ethical sourcing. And that's building your story. Obviously nowadays, much of our advertising is done online and through Instagram, and this can really be the way to build your story. Sourcing sustainably now is a little bit easier too. There's many shows going on. LA Textile has a great sustainable section, Intertextile in Shanghai, Tex World in New York. All these shows have sustainable sections and seminars that will help you learn your path. So we've seen some proven success through sustainable sourcing, both on our own and also with a variety of brands that we deal with. Tender's lucky enough to have over 3,000 customers in North America, and I can proudly state at least 2,000 of those are sourcing and using sustainable textiles from us. Many of these are small designers that might have their own boutique or their own line, and they have done a wonderful job of growing. So I see sourcing sustainably has grown organically as a result. One of the companies that we deal with in Toronto is called Encircled. It's in addition to being a certified B Corporation, Encircled has been sourcing and utilizing sustainable materials since day one, almost 8 years ago. These include Tencel, Modal, Ecovero. and a variety of other fibers. Every year, they improve their sourcing by finding ways to utilize even the scrap fabric from production to make value-added accessories. They believe that what you own shouldn't require you to compromise on your values, and their vision is to make fast fashion obsolete. This is, again, manufacturing with that zero waste mentality is a fantastic way to see things going. Another company that we've dealt with over the years is called Airtight. Becoming more sustainable accidentally on purpose is one of their slogans. So you can see by the nature of their garments, their comfort, there's a beautiful drape to their styling. Airtight's path to sustainable fabric selection is different from brands with eco built into their ethos. End consumers seek their polished ease aesthetic without demanding accountability, forcing the fabrics to have to win on fashion merits before sustainability is considered. Without interest in the marketing spin, in addition to their commitment to a well-constructed, timeless Canadian-made offering, their philosophy is to increasingly prioritize sustainable fabrications and industry best practices in a purposeful and measured ways. As a variety of fashion, viable, domestically stocked, sustainable fabrics increase, Airtight is able to make it easy for consumers to care without sacrificing design. And then ethical profiling, which will link us to Camp Edwards, who will be following me in a minute here, founded on the principles of sustainable sourcing. This was their unique selling proposition right from inception. Ethical profiling's very first client was Coca-Cola, and they approached them with a right to win that was different from any other offering they'd received. Their objective was, at the time and remains to this day, to create meaningful and authentic sustainability stories for their clients that their clients could tell through their apparel collections. Since 2009, they've remained true to their objectives, and this unwavering commitment and consistency of the value of sustainable sourcing has enabled them to gain a foothold as a trusted sustainability consultant and custom production house. Both Kendor and ethical profiling work closely together on many programs right now, as we've been working through the pandemic, recycle polyester for masks and a variety of other garments. So that takes us to the end, and I will stop the screen sharing now and kick it back to over to Camp Edwards.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks very much. My name's Kemp Edwards, and as Paul kindly introduced me, I'm the owner of Ethical Profiling and a brand called Econic, or Econic Apparel. Paul and I have been working together for, at least 11 years, I think, since our inception. I started Ethical Profiling as a consulting company to help corporations make ethical purchasing decisions. Our mission was to help clients make a bigger marketing impact with a smaller environmental footprint. And then that, over the course of the last decade, spurred us to develop our own domestic manufacturing arm, which is focused on sustainable offerings. And the mission of Econic is to develop sustainable apparel, the most sustainable apparel options possible, and then make them accessible to private label, corporate purchasers, ethical online marketplaces. Some of the clients that Paul may end up selling fabric to, funnily enough, sometimes comes full circle as they will come back to us to see if we can do the CMT work and help them realize their vision. And usually it's not too long before we realize that we identify the fabric that they're working with, and we say, oh, well, we can work with Paul directly on this. Don't worry. We'll make this chain one step faster and smoother. So we really work on managing and auditing our supply chain. We did so overseas before we started working primarily domestically. We look to employ ethical production and management practices. We're focusing our efforts on promoting and developing certified sustainable materials for use in production. So working with people like Paul, working with the mills that he's working with to see what steps that they're taking that can push the envelope forward in this space. And then seeking ways to minimize the waste, both our own waste as well as the waste of our clients, and maximize opportunities for recycling and upcycling those waste streams. That's how we captured Coca-Cola as a client, was we looked at their waste stream being recycled plastic bottles. It was an easy transition, less easy 10 years ago, but easy transition to look at working with recycled PET to develop programs for them. It happened to be an Olympic program. So they were given a megaphone to talk about what they were doing of capturing their waste stream and turning it into their uniform apparel program for the Olympics. And then we work with our clients to help them develop and communicate their commitment to corporate social responsibility. And part of that an important part is helping your client communicate that commitment, because if they can use their voices to create awareness of what's possible, it will push other people to take that step to do what's possible as well. I'm going to turn my screen sharing on here as well. And can everybody see that okay? Okay. So the focus of ethical profiling has been both domestic and international sourcing. We specialize in socially and environmentally responsible products, and our lead has come primarily from recycled PET and other sustainable fabrics, but it really started with recycled PET. That's growing, I'd like to say right now, to include recycled PET that is from our oceans. So we partnered with a company that is based primarily out of Costa Rica, as well as New York and LA. It's owned in part by Pharrell Williams, and they have a social enterprise that helps clean plastic up along the coastlines in South America, and then process that plastic to develop new materials, which then we're working with to input into programs. We got a long history of producing sustainable and ethically sourced apparel and gifting programs for Olympic projects, for the FIFA World Cup, for the World Expo, and corporate clients that range from what we call our true greens, like Arbor Day Foundation, World Wildlife Federation, David Suzuki Foundation, to our larger corporations like TELUS Communications and Coca-Cola. And some of those big companies have really helped us to gain a foothold in establishing ourselves as a viable option, establishing sustainable potentials for production as a viable option to change over the production they might have otherwise been doing. I'm going to just change the slide here. Econic Apparel is a domestic manufacturer, and we are focused really, as I said, it was a natural evolution to go from ethical profiling into Econic. We found that it was very difficult to find domestic sourcing opportunities, especially for sustainable apparel. And our number one hurdle to overcome was price. Paul touched on that a little earlier in his talk. And we thought, if we're going to try and make products that don't suffer from style, quality, fit, function, or price considerations, we need to at least part own the manufacturing so we can become more vertically integrated. We can work on domestic manufacturing to reduce carbon footprint, but also to reduce duties and logistics costs. We can establish key strategic alliances, such as the one that we have with Candor. And then we have a combined appetite and investment in the continued development of new and ever more sustainable materials and practices. So I've put together a little slide that for us talks about the current impediments to the proliferation of sustainable textiles. These are really consumer barriers. So challenges that we've seen over the course of the last decade to making sustainable sourcing more accessible for everyone. And maybe I'll start with accessibility, because that's our number one concern, is how do we make this available to more people so that they don't have to do the digging and 10 years of work or research that we did to be able to get a brand or get a program up and off the ground that tells a sustainable story. The price consideration, of course, sustainable options are traditionally more expensive. Over the course of the last 10 years, with more people getting into the field of sustainability, the pricing has come down a little bit. We've been able to work, like Paul was mentioning, to get lower minimums, of course, which helps ease the pain in costs as you're setting up brands or you're setting up programs that are sustainable. There's been a consumer mentality that performance suffers when it comes to sustainable materials, that the performance characteristics aren't as good. And I'm very happy to say that there's been some really, really amazing people in this space working diligently for the last 20 years to overcome that barrier, to make sure that we've got alternatives to coatings on jackets, let's say for technical outerwear, that are more environmentally conscious, but still have the same breathability and waterproof ratings, not to mention drape qualities of more subtle fabrics and such as well. Overcoming the topic of style, traditional fashion has really been based on communicating to clients that they should be changing their wardrobe every month or every season or every year. That's really the power of that fast fashion has had. They've had a lot of money to push at consumers to tell them that, to be in style means to be wearing their newest collection. And I think that we're overcoming that a little bit. I can see the large fast fashion companies are either purposefully or forcibly making a shift right now to reuse and to look at end of life on programs that they're producing as well. Another thing we've looked at is misinformation. We all know about greenwashing, false claims, and a lack of transparency. That's changing quite rapidly. People are being called out on it. People are doing their due diligence. I remember going to trade shows and such and asking, even as little as 3 to 5 years ago, asking for factory audits or compliance certificates from manufacturers we were looking to work with overseas. And their agents had no idea what I was talking about. I got blank faces when I asked them about it. Or they'd say, yeah, we've got all that. We can get it to you. I'm really happy to say that in the last few years, there's no blank faces. They hand me a document almost immediately, knowing that that's what I'm going to need to be able to move forward. And I'm preparing those people who I come to meetings with before I get to a trade show, for instance, to say, these are the things that we're looking for. If you have them, fantastic. If you can send them to us ahead of time, we can review them, and then we can have a meaningful discussion once we see each other. And if you don't have them, that's fine. If you're looking to try and obtain them, we may be able to help you down that road. And if you're not looking to try and obtain them, we'll just respectfully choose to not meet with you and meet with someone else in that time frame, so as to not waste your time or ours. And the last portion of this, which I was sort of segueing into, is the education component. It's about a knowledge for consumers to understand why there is a need for sustainability and what options there are available to them. But it's also about sharing knowledge with other people in our industry. Sometimes that's a supplier that hasn't walked through a social compliance audit before, and you may be able to send them a preparatory doc, or share with them, a similar corrective action report for a factory doing similar kind of work, and explain to them that you're able to bring them increased business if they're able to go through the steps of obtaining social compliance reports, or of going through the steps of inputting sustainability into their supply chain and doing a supply chain audit of their own raw materials and such. I'll move to the next slide here. There we go. This is comes from the Textiles Economy, which is a document put out by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and Circular Fibers Initiative. If you haven't read A Textiles Economy, it's a long read, but a very, very good one. And if you're on this call right now, I know already that your focus is well aligned with what the new Textiles Economy document is all about. I definitely encourage you to have a look. I've taken this document to be transparent.
Sorry.
The red notes are my own that I've added in. This really talks about circularity, which Paul touched upon, and what I also see as the future of ethical and sustainable sourcing.
Kemp?
Yep.
We're not seeing a different slide here.
Oh, okay. Hang on 2 secs.
Okay.
Let me see if I can. There we go. You got it there?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is really our my look at the circular economy principles through the eyes of what Circular Fibers and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has already done. We're looking first at phasing out substances of concern and microfiber release. This is really the introduction of bio alternatives that, for me, they need to seamlessly integrate into existing production models. We are, of course, making advancements in production to be more sustainable and more ethical. And if we can build fabrics that can plug and play into our existing production models, it will help us get there that much faster, especially while we continue to make advancements on the production technologies. Increasing clothing utilization is what we refer to as the built to last movement. It's a movement away from fast fashion. It's creating quality apparel that will last more than one season, that is intended to last more than one season. If you have a good ski jacket, for instance, there's no reason that it can't last the vast majority of your life as a skier. It might even be able to be passed on to someone afterwards if it's built properly. But if the coatings are done poorly and they all start to flake off, or it starts fraying at the edges, or the waterproofing isn't done, it isn't properly seam sealed, then it's only going to last a season or two and it's going to end up in our landfill. And then we look at radically improving recycling. This is a focus on not just post-industrial recycling, but post-consumer recycling. And it's really important to identify that difference, because early on in the recycling and upcycling stage of raw materials, companies, especially plastic companies, for which I had a bioplastic company for a few years, they're focused very much on post-industrial, which is great that we're able to recapture our waste at an industrial and production level. But it can, depending on the scenario, reward companies to be inefficient, because they end up with lots of post-industrial waste, which they then can upcycle and sell at a greater price point to people looking to use that waste and tell that story. So of course, our first objective is to reduce waste, and then we want to capture whatever waste we can. But beyond that, we want to capture it post-consumer and put it back into the stream so that it doesn't end up in a landfill. Part of that is going to be our increased focus on an ability to separate blended materials. There's people who are able to do that right now, though it hasn't reached full scale commercialization. I would say probably the most prolific area right now is recycled and upcycled cotton. There's companies in Mexico and North Carolina, and probably the oldest one being Foray in Spain has been at it for a really long time. Increasing publicly funded textile programs and upcycling programs is how I see the way that we're going to be able to capture that waste stream better. I'd love to see, government funding in this space. I'd love to see a commitment from multiple facilities, multiple factories, multiple brands to figure out how do we bring this all together to work with a partner so that we can radically change the way that textiles are recycled right now. In 2017, I sat as the vice president of the Canadian Textile Recovery Effort, and there was conversations around the government of Canada, at least implementing extended producer responsibility in textiles, which would require us to responsibly recycle textiles. And unfortunately, that never went through. It's something that I feel has every potential to move through so that we reclaim textiles like we do cans and electronics and bottles and such. Paul and I are working on trying to figure out how we can do that in a very local area here in Vancouver. We love to share, have conversations and share ideas with those of you on the call who are having discussions and considerations on this point as well. We right now are missing widespread reclamation, and that's what we need to be able to get to. Then Ellen MacArthur and Circular Fibers has added this component of anaerobic digestion and composting. This is obviously mostly for bio alternatives. And then the exit of other material streams that may be used in other industries altogether. And then this feeds back into renewably sourced feedstocks and making the most effective use of resources as inputs. And I put a little note here as C2C design. That's really the cradle to cradle model, which was popularized by McDonough and Brongart in 2002 in their book Cradle to Cradle. And I believe they have a follow-up to that as well. If you haven't looked at that book, I definitely suggest doing so. Recycled PT, recaptured and recycled ocean plastic, recycled cotton initiatives, anything we can do to promote forward movement in the textile space from a circular economy perspective is really helpful to move the needle on sustainability. Upcycled post-industrial cotton, I said, is probably the most commercially viable right now, but we definitely need to do more work in this space, and we need to find better ways to recycle and upcycle blended and polymer fibers so that we can move forward in that space, and then also simultaneously introduce more and more biotextiles. of which there's quite a few incredible ones that are in development and even able to be used right now. Mycelium leathers. There's a company called Bolt that's doing mycelium leathers and microsilk. There's Spiber, which is a brood protein based on the idea of spider silk and spider web. AgriLoop by Circular Systems is using the waste from agricultural fields and such. Instead of that being incinerated or left to fallow and release methane in fields, they're using that to create textile. AlgaeNet is doing some work right now. I don't think they're ready to launch yet, but they're doing some important work. There's all sorts of orange and pineapple and mango fibers that are being used as leather alternatives. And then, of course, there's so many great processes that are coming through production: water-free dyeing processes, more eco-conscious inks, enzymatic degreasing, these sorts of things as well. So I'm hoping that circularity will be something that we all join forces on to help move industry forward. And that means each of us need to be accountable for our section and need to hold each other accountable for those parts that we don't do ourselves. I want to end on by saying that we talk a lot about the power of purchasing, this idea of voting with your dollar. And I completely agree with that. It's not just the consumer that needs to vote with their dollar and buy sustainable and ethical so that it gives us the impetus to produce it. And it's our own responsibility in the chain of production to support those companies that are producing sustainably and to purchase from them so that we can have the paradigm shift that we need in purchasing habits for future generations. And that may be domestic production that you're supporting, or even better, local production, purchasing sustainable raw materials like those that Kendra is working with, employing environmentally responsible manufacturing practices, of course, encouraging or demanding the use of eco inks and dyes, requiring waste management at the facilities that you're working with, at the dye houses that you're working with. Eliminating plastic packaging is obviously an easy one. All of these things are really important contributors to push the needle forward considerably on sustainable sourcing. So Kelly, I'll put this back to you or on to you, Chris, to see what questions people have. I'm really excited for the opportunity to share ideas with those on the call and those companies that have committed to making steps towards sustainable sourcing.
Yeah, of course, that was a great presentation, Kemp. Thank you so much for that. We do have a couple questions coming in, and I also have some prepared myself. Let me just see if we can get the screen sharing stopped, and then if we can have Paul join in with his camera as well. And I will start sharing my camera as well.
Kelly, are you able to stop my screen? I got too many screens here and I can't.
There we go.
Thank you.
No worries. All right, so that was great. Thank you both Paul and Kemp for that. Very interesting ideas presented. We're just gonna jump right into the Q&A here with some questions. We've got quite a few flowing through that I've been reviewing throughout your presentations. So the first one here that I've taken down is from Kim Taylor, and this one's for Paul. She asks, how do you find sustainability in your organization?
Well, that's a good question as always. I think there's so many ways that one can define sustainability, and it's constantly growing. I think if you look up the term, it's changing all the time. We personally look at it along ways of every action we take in this building is working towards some form of sustainability, whether or not it's trying to, utilize every bit of plastic that comes into our building and to repackage and send out. And then of course we have plastic recycling and a whole variety of different recyclings, cardboard recycling, but also sustainability in how we source. We're trying to get away from sourcing anything that cannot be closed loop and cannot eventually be upcycled. And that's a real push for us. It's difficult. And Kemp and I have talked about this a lot too. I mean, it's going to be changing all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Okay, the next question is for you, Kemp. Someone in the chat asked, let me get her name right. Sule Al, sorry if I said your name correctly. He's asking you, Kemp, if you work with tiny startup brands as well as larger corporations.
Absolutely. I would say the majority of our brands that we work with are startups, especially in the last 7 months. I would say a lot of people have embraced what may have been an off the side of their desk project to say, this is what I want to do. This is the best time for an abrupt stop to what I was doing and a new change and a new beginning to what I want to do. So we have a lot of people. We have documents that, we help people with on taking their first steps as a brand. What's important in sustainability considerations. We help them, develop mood boards, identify the budgets that they're going to need to get started, look at different fabrics and fabrications. And we have a full team of designers, in-house designers and graphic artists, and even an industrial designer to help the path along for those smaller brands.
Awesome. The next question is for the both of you, whoever wants to take it on, and it's from Natalie. She says that she's read various studies on materials made from recycled PET and actually sheds when washed because of their content. Is that the case? And if it is, are there efforts being made to improve this unintended consequences of using our PET?
I could jump in on this. I personally haven't read that particular any information on that, and I'd love it if you can share that with us. I'd love to follow up on that. Most of our recycled poly we're currently getting out of Taiwan, which is considered sort of one of the top ones on that. We do work with Reprieve and Unify, and I mean, let's face it, every single fiber sheds, and that's an issue that's growing constantly in people's awareness, and I'm not sure where we can move forward on that. There's a lot of things one can do in not washing a garment as frequently as they usually do. And, top loading washing machines have been proven to shed less than an agitating washing machine. There's a lot of research on certain fibers are worse than others, obviously, and recycled poly or regular poly is in the forefront in a lot of people's minds. But I've also read articles in Eco Textile News about wool being one of the things that they have found to have shed a lot. So I think we're constantly going to be learning about this and trying to adapt.
Yeah. To add to that, I've done a little research in this space as well. There are some companies that are focused on new filtration systems for washing machines, even to be able to capture those smaller particles. There are different types of recycled PET that shed more than others. For instance, one of the worst ones that we had originally was polar fleece because of it being brushed heavily on both sides and having smaller particles and stuff that would release. Unbrushed garments, like for instance, if I wash a fleece, a brushed fleece, for instance, versus a recycled PET blended jersey, the amount that I'm going to have that releases off it is going to be drastically different. So finding ways to change the finish, even whether the front face or the back face of a garment is predominantly recycled PET or organic cotton, or how it's blended, how it's built, is going to have a difference on how those pieces get released.
Awesome. So we do have a question that did gain a little bit of traction here. This one is going back to the beginning of Paul's presentation, and it says, when you say bamboo isn't fully sustainable, do you mean because it's normally used in the viscose process? If it's used with a closed loop viscose process, such as the kind by lensing, could it be more sustainable? Or does it have to do with the growing bamboo itself?
Yeah, it's certainly not to do with the growing. From my knowledge of bamboo growth, and mainly in China is where it's done. There's no groundwater pollution. There's no pesticides used. There's no water used. So that aspect of it is fine. It's strictly that viscose process, and it's similar to the rayon process. So it's not exactly something that control of off-gassing is happening on. And I think that's one of the biggest aspects of pollution with bamboo processing. And then also the cake that's left over, the disposal of the cake, which is sort of, if you can imagine, a soupy mass that they extrude the fiber from. So I think those are the main issues. There are some woven bamboo fibers that are less intrusive. I think maybe Kemp has some info on those, but I think in general, the gold standard being the tensile lyocell right now.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah, we used to have, when I obtained Econic, it was called something else beforehand, and they had a fairly extensive bamboo program, and it was one of the first things that we got rid of, exactly for the reasons discussed. though you're right. I mean, lensing has made obviously some advancements in that area. Whatever we can recapture and feed into the sort of this idea of circular principles and textiles will go a long way to helping us. But there are obviously more sustainable options that we can choose, like Tencel and Modal, that have very, very similar properties and characteristics. So, you know, when we can, that is what we will choose.
Awesome. So I do have some prepared questions that I'd like to ask you guys. It does cover quite a few of other questions that were posed in the chat function as well. So the first one that I will ask, this can be answered by with whoever, is what are some common misconceptions people have about sustainable sourcing, and how could we combat these misconceptions and communicate more effectively?
Paul, you want to take that?
You go ahead first if you like.
Sure. So, I mean, some of the common misconceptions for sure is that there's an enormous price barrier and that clients won't necessarily follow them down that path if they're going to be more expensive. I think it's been proven in the market that people will follow you down a path of expensive goods potentially that aren't even sustainable. So why wouldn't they down a sustainable path? The low-has consumer has been growing exponentially over the course of the last few years. I did some research on it 15 years ago, and they were talking about the low-has consumer being ready to pay 15% more. I think they're now saying that the low-has consumer is ready to pay 25% more. I'm not necessarily seeing that in our business space of dealing with corporate entities. It may be the case more with end consumers, but for sure there is a market. And if we share our knowledge and teachings on the benefits of sustainable procurement and sustainable production and development of new materials and new programs, I know that our next generations are going to follow us. If not out of interest, at one point it'll be out of necessity.
Yeah, we've certainly found that it's a lot easier to source than it was when I first started on this. 20 years ago, it was very difficult to find that. I think we mentioned that earlier too. Nowadays, pretty well every mill I deal with has the option to find us some form of sustainable fiber, and their minimums have come down dramatically. So thus the pricing has come down, and I really think there's really no excuse. Direct to consumer will drive this, and that's really how we're going to see this growth, is that the demand on the direct to consumer brands that we sell to is gigantic. Over these 7 months, like Kemp's saying, we've had so many startups, people that are interested in this lifelong ambition of starting a line, and I think it's fantastic, and we want to continue to support it.
Definitely, definitely. One question for Kemp from George is, what are 3 actionable steps that smaller brands can take in the sustainable sourcing movement?
Sorry, would you mind repeating that one more time, please?
Yeah, of course. What are 3 actionable steps that smaller brands can take in the sustainable sourcing movement? That's a big question off the top of your head.
Yeah, 3. I mean, there's a lot of steps to be taken for sure. Research and educate yourself first on what's possible, and I would say look at what's local. Look to local first. See what you can do in your own community, because A, you're supporting that community. B, you're reducing your carbon footprint. That support of your local community, that's not just bringing money into your community, but it's supporting other companies like yours that are trying to move the needle on sustainability. So I think that there's great work to do there. Sustainable fabrics, I would say those inputs, whether it's, the finding companies like Textile, talking to people like Paul, like myself, like other people in the industry, who have already been in this space for a while, and just picking our brains. I love sharing information. I know Paul does as well. And he and I regularly, go back and forth and share our ideas, or we'll come back from a conference and say, hey, you know what, I found this guy or that guy, or what did you think about this? So definitely sharing information with one another, and then looking for ethical production practices, those that are lowering the intensity of let's say lowering waste and reducing that in manufacturing, lowering the amount of energy input, and then using ethical practices. Some company that, if you ask them about social compliance, doesn't give you a blank stare and nod. They need to sort of be on your page. If they're not picking up what you're putting down, then you're probably talking to the wrong person.
Awesome. That's a great answer. I have another question here for the both of you. Do you think that the word sustainability has shifted from a movement to a trend in brands? And what do you think we could do to change this, if so?
Yeah, I'd say it definitely is a movement. The trend was probably 5 years ago, I think, when it was becoming fashionable to add a collection that was sustainable. But now it's definitely a movement. And I also think just like Kemp was saying earlier, like the communication amongst eco designers, if I can use that term, is amazing. And the collaboration, we have customers who source together, like they'll come to us and say, we want to do this item together. They're in competing streams, but because they're friends and because they believe in this system, they want to keep it going. So I think it's definitely a movement.
I agree. This is not a trend. It may have been a trend to get started. It is for sure a movement, and it's a movement out of necessity. I think, for people who are paying attention to what's happening on our planet right now, which I'd like to think is most of us. We realize that we need a paradigm shift in how we do business. Business as usual can't continue indefinitely. So this has to be a movement. And it means that everybody in our space is already taking up this as their cause and pushing those who are getting into the industry to make it their cause as well.
Awesome. So just looking through the questions here, we have one here at the top. Does ethical profiling work with educating youth as a consumer segment?
Not as much as we should. I sit on the board for Kwantlen Polytechnic here in Vancouver. That's I would say the little bit that I do. As I said, not enough. And it's interesting because when I got started, that was probably about 8 years ago that I joined the board. And I started with speaking engagements at Kwantlen. And I was very much interested in speaking with fourth years, thinking that, I wanted to talk to people who were more advanced in terms of their ideologies and understanding for sustainable practices. And I subsequently changed that to work more with first years because they hadn't yet chosen their path as to which direction they wanted to go in creating their lines and developing their vision. And I wanted to help influence that to be more sustainable focused. So I definitely do. I welcome conversations. Our staff are very well trained to have those conversations as well. I would say that it comes more from helping startups than it does from helping youth, but I am always eager, interested, and available for an opportunity to speak with youth about the movement as well.
Awesome. One for Paul and Kemp from Mary. Do you foresee milling coming back to Canada in the next 5 years? And what would need to occur to reinvigorate the industry here / finance investors? Do you have a sense of the capital investment required and labor force training required?
That's a big one. Yeah, we've looked at that ourselves. One of the biggest issues is the really stringent effluent standards that North America, particularly here in Vancouver, there's a real difficulty in dealing with the water waste in this business, and it's a very water intensive business, both milling, dyeing, finishing, whichever. It would certainly make some sense. Geographically, we're quite isolated here in Vancouver where we're based, and it's sort of the same thing back east. A majority of the people that do any kind of domestic knitting, and there's no weaving anymore, but knitting in Eastern Canada, they have 1 or 2 dye houses that they can dye in. So making product here in Canada particularly is difficult. America, it's a different story. There's both coasts still have some, but yeah, I can't imagine it being under a $20 or $30 million project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we work with a few different mills in Canada. As Paul said, they're all knitting mills, not weaving mills. A few in Montreal and Toronto area, and one of them does their own dyeing. I definitely give preference to those who are vertical because I know that they can control that process a little bit tighter than someone who's plus the others who are sort of lined up to get into one dye house. You can often get a backlog and your program might not go through in the speed that you need it to. I would love to see an investment, as I said earlier, from the government, or maybe a combined investment from private capital to look at creating a circular system here, where in which we could do the recycling portion and then do the look at the milling, the next stage of it, from literally start to finish. But I think if we're going to spend the money and investment in developing a mill or another mill and dye house in Canada, that it should look at that holistic approach of all the different stages of it, so that it has a reason for being above and beyond just having a domestic mill.
Awesome. So I have just 2 questions left here. This one is for Paul. What would be the best resources for people who want to dive in deeper on sustainable sourcing?
Best resources. I think Textile Exchange is fantastic. There's a lot of information can be found on there. Many of these resource-based places will have student discounts, and you can find a lot of information there. I also personally find a lot of information through Eco Textile News, again, which is a print. You can either get the print or the online subscription. Those 2 are fantastic. There's Canopy, which will give you a lot of information about things along the line. Any of these cellulose fibers like Tencel, Model, old growth rayon, forests, they really opened my mind to a lot of that aspect, and I really don't like to touch anything rayon as a result. I think those are my main ones. Kemp, you think of any?
Yeah, I mean, I'd add the resource library from Fashion for Good. The work that Kelly's doing, who's kindly hosted us here as well. There's, Fashion Takes Action, organizations such as that are really having the conversations with everybody in the industry, and are motivated to put us in contact with one another. Look for those contacts and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you point me in the right direction? And I can speak for myself and Paul to say, absolutely, we'd point you in the right direction, even if it means to a competitor.
Yeah,
for sure.
All right, so the last question, since we're almost out of time, in around 30 seconds, what's the main message you would like the audience to take away today?
Paul, you go first.
Okay, don't stop on your dream. Keep going, because no matter what, there's a way. And reach out to people like ourselves. We're happy to share what knowledge we have and connections we have. Like Kemp said, there's a path for sure. That's
I wish you had sung that to "Don't Stop Believing," because I would have recorded that one.
That would have been good.
I mean, yeah, I really echo Paul's thoughts. We share a lot in common in our mindset on this. Keep pushing forward. Know that there are a lot of other people also pushing forward. And when we join hands and raise the water level, everybody's boat floats.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thanks to our panel, to Kendor Textiles for your sponsorship of this panel. Without it, we wouldn't be able to offer these free sessions. As I mentioned, this was recorded, so you can share it with your work colleagues when we send you the link next week. Also, I just want to add on what Kemp had shared about pre and post consumer textile waste. And Kemp, I think you and I need to have a conversation. But for any of you that are on this webinar who produce any post-industrial or pre-consumer waste, Fashion Takes Action is conducting the first textile recycling feasibility study in Canada, which is being supported by Environment and Climate Change Canada, the federal government. Our goal is to provide a solution for you and your waste. Of course, what cannot be reused, we're talking about here, but we need the data from the industry on the volume and the composition of this waste in order for us to determine if there's enough feedstock to recycle those materials here in Canada. And the results of our survey will actually include a roadmap for the industry as well. And what we hope is a business case for either mechanical or chemical recycling. So if you're interested, I did post the link to the English version of the survey in the chat. We do have it also, this is Canada, we have it also available in French too. And so, because we're juggling various time zones today with our speakers, these three, of course, 3 hours behind me, it's early morning there. Now we're going to head over to London in the UK for our third and final session. So if you have registered for this Fabrics of the Future with Fashion for Good, you'll need to end this webinar now and then go to that link. And I will see you there momentarily. Thanks again to our panel. You're all amazing. We learned so much from you. And I hope that our viewers today were inspired. So thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.